Thanks for having me. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it, so I'm pleased you're able to squeeze me in here. I just wanted to talk about a couple things. I think what you're doing is very important, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of excellent presentations across the province. I just want to focus on two things: investments in public services, particularly as it relates to the social policy framework that Dave Hancock is releasing on Thursday morning at a press conference. So in that, they have consulted with people across the province about what our social policy should be looking like, from childcare to education to poverty reduction strategies. And so we are advocating, as we have for many years with a whole bunch of our partner groups, around comprehensive poverty reduction strategy. And in our recent report that we put out with the Edmonton Social Planning Council and the College of Social Workers, talked about what it means to invest in quality public services and how that impacts on the average families that are out there, and whether or not we're going to achieve the Premier's promise that she made on April 11th to eliminate child poverty in 5 years. So we're quite skeptical about the way in which the current budget is going to move us further away from that promise than actually achieve that promise. So we've done lots of work over the years on early childhood education care, and the investments in that are incredibly low. Certainly we see cuts in our education system impacting on some of the most vulnerable students, the special ed needs, the teacher support staff that are in our schools that are incredibly stretched, and as well as the disability services sector that has for years had 0% increases and really struggling with the new contract structures that they have. And you heard from some of our partner groups with post-secondary education about the implications around that. It's come to my attention recently, and I'm going to the media on this, that the summer temporary employment program is actually being cut, and that's a $14 million program that is incredibly important for community organizations. The STEP program. And we're putting out a release on that tomorrow. And you know, I'm a president of my community league, and that's partially how we came about finding this out, was that on Thursday is the day that we would normally be is the deadline for filing for STEP. So Thursday is also the day that Hancock is releasing his social policy framework. So the irony is not lost on us, shall we say, that here he is cutting community programs. Our own Riverdale Community Leagues looking at not being able to run our playground programs this summer. So it's going to impact on every community across Edmonton and across the province. So obviously you've heard lots of concerns about cuts and the implications and the impacts on families. On the revenue side, of course, we've been challenging the whole question of the flat tax for a very long time. We also, I don't know if it's come up in your other sessions, need to remind the government that a few years ago under Stelmach, they had approved a liquor sales tax increase, which would increase to $183 million a year. Stelmach backtracked on that promise that was already put in place, and then resulted in other cuts moving forward. With respect to the flat tax, I've put together a little table, if you will. I'll just give you guys this. Thank you. Nothing like numbers. Because I think we need to debunk the myth of the flat tax as somehow being equated to low taxes. I think a lot of Albertans that I've talked to think that somehow we pay the lowest income taxes in Canada. And as I put on here, low and middle income earners pay more in income tax, while the wealthy laugh all the way to the bank. So you can go, anyone can do this, you can go to the Ernst & Young tax calculator website, no flaming lefties there, and put in your taxable income and see what you would pay in your combined federal and provincial tax. So this table that I have here, goes from $30,000 a year up to those of you in the room who are making $1 million a year, like Brian here. So just to give you an example, though, a family earning $30,000 taxable income would actually pay $334. That's 8% more than if you lived in BC, or $231 more, or 5.5% more than if you lived in Ontario. A middle-income family earning $70,000 a year would pay $1,434, 9% more than if you lived in BC, or $919, 4.8% more than if you lived in Ontario. So this myth that somehow we're paying the lowest income taxes in Canada doesn't work, unless, of course, you're making $1 million a year. Actually, it transitions at about $150,000 a year to where you actually are earning the lowest income taxes in Canada. So someone who has a taxable income of $1 million a year will pay $41,000 less than if they lived in BC each year. Someone who earns $1 million a year in taxable income would pay $75,000 less than living in Alberta than they would if they lived in Ontario. And those are the next two closest tax jurisdictions. That's a very nice car. Every year. Yeah, there you go. So obviously there's the politics behind this. Those folks who are earning over $1 million a year like to keep that extra 75 grand a year coming into them. And why they don't want to have a conversation about getting rid of the flat tax is very, very real in their pocketbooks. But it's also very real for the average low and middle income earner. And somehow we have to get that point across to all of them. And we'll put this up on our website and we'll distribute this around. But obviously lots more I could be saying, and we'll just leave it there and open it up for questions if you have any. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your presentation as falling under the finance critic area.
Oh,
and
good.
That means David Egan.
Excellent. You better have a tough one for me.
Well, all things spring from finance too, really, don't they? So, think of it that way. Thanks, Bill. I mean, this is a very straightforward way to explain just how, and the fact that people are paying considerably more in that middle area where all of us reside is particularly enlightening. I guess. Well, my first question is very simple. You want to release this thing tomorrow?
I'm doing the press release on
the
step
program?
tomorrow.
Okay, so are you? I mean,
I'll just
people
post
might be. You might have kind of released it inadvertently right now because there's people that might tweet it or whatever. That's no big deal.
Go
right?
wild.
Go for it. Yeah. So we want. That's okay. We'll
Absolutely.
some advance.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Darren.
He's laughing because, okay, so Bill, what I'm asking for, what I'd like, and you may not have it right now, but something that I think often the Tories seem to go after or forget are all the benefits of investing in whether it's poverty reduction, social services, and the benefits that they pay off, which, I mean, I'm sure most people in the room are aware of. But if I was looking to get a hold of some quantifiable numbers that I could use either in the legislature or in our own releases, would you be able to get us, the benefit of how much, again, it saves, I mean, not only people and the social benefits of it, but the actual economic benefits of investing in, fighting against homelessness, poverty, et cetera?
Yeah, Vibrant Communities Calgary did an excellent report along with a number of groups, ourselves included, called The Cost of Poverty, and they estimated by using a similar formula to what the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives did in Ontario, that it would be a savings annually of $7.2 to $9.1 billion a year to actually invest in eliminating poverty in terms of the cost savings that you would have in terms of criminal justice system or healthcare system, and what they call a lost opportunity cost. And so we have a link off our Public Interest Alberta website to that report, but it came from Private Communities Calgary and Action to End Poverty in Alberta. So it's well detailed and a good analysis there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Rachel?
A clarification and a question.
Okay.
In terms of the clarification, does the Ernst Young calculator take into account the income, the exemptions? Because I mean, I believe that this is generally to be true, the case, but
Yeah.
whenever I raise this sort of $30,000 idea in the legislature or in committees or whatever, I'm quickly told by the Tories that in fact, because of the exemptions under the flat tax, that in Alberta, our lowest income people, and I believe it's household incomes are around between 30 and 35 and down, don't pay any of the flat tax because we have a very generous exemption, they tell us. So I'm just curious, was that fact, is that part of the Ernst Young calculator or not?
Yeah, it would be. Those are the combined federal provincial taxes, the totals that you would pay, and it's the taxable income. So that, in other words, after your other deductions would be taken into consideration. But absolutely, the amount of where, at which point you start paying taxes should be, I didn't see the back-end metrics of it, but
You're
I'm
pretty
assuming
sure
Ernst
they-
Young
that
would
that's
have,
in
absolutely. I mean, that's just the basic first step, is to say, at what point do you start paying taxes and how do you roll that up? We do have a high personal exemption limit to start with, but obviously, once you hit over, I think, 12 or 13,000 a year, that's at which point your basic personal exemption is beyond that.
Okay, so that was my clarification.
Okay, that was
My-
your question?
No, that was my clarification. My
Nice try, Brian.
In terms of the social policy framework, what's your sense about what they're going to come up with? Because I know you've been involved in the process quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, Minister Hancock has been around a long time and done a number of these consultations, and I would commend him on actually a very good open process compared to some others, like water that we're in the middle of right now, which is pathetic. But the reality for him is that he's not in charge of the budget. And we've seen it before where you've got nice words coming from 40,000 feet looking down at everything looks all rosy. But on one hand, you can't be saying we're going to invest in communities and we're going to look at poverty prevention at the same time as you're actually planning to eliminate a program like the STEP program. And so that's where it's important to talk about the reality for people on the ground and whether or not at the end of the day, individuals and families are going to be better off. And he's one minister and not really in charge of the finances going forward. They're going through the results-based budgeting. We have no idea what that process is actually doing internally, and that's an unfortunate thing as well. You have a good public consultation on what results you want, and then you go behind closed doors to do results-based budgeting. You have to define your results first before you can do results-based budgeting. So I'm very, very concerned about what's going to come out the other end of this.
Thanks very much for that. I wanted to ask about the ambitious proposal of the government to end child poverty in 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think that Alberta is one of the few, if not the only province without a poverty reduction strategy. And it was notably missing from the speech from the throne, even though it figured prominently in the Conservative campaign platform. So what, in your view, does an effective program to eliminate child poverty look like? What kind of costs do you think would be involved?
Well, we hosted forums around the province where we actually engaged many people in 7 different cities and came up with a lot of critical ideas. There are many things that are happening that are actually working, so it's just a question of ramping certain things that are very effective up. And that a priority has to be on investing in the things that are going to prevent poverty over the long term. It's just smart economics, it's going to save us money. Sherry Torgman from the Caledon Institute wrote a policy document that looked at 10 different themes that need to be included in any comprehensive poverty reduction strategy. And that actually we've pushed heavily to be included in the social policy framework discussion going forward. And so those things are everything from housing policy through to disability services to income supplementation programs, and to looking at questions of assets. I mean, we have policies in this province that run counter to the vision with respect to if you have assets, and students can know this, if you own a car or have some RRSPs, all of a sudden you're no longer eligible to get student loans, or if you need to go on social assistance, if you have any assets, you have to basically wear those down completely. So asset policy, the United Way of Edmonton, or the Capital Region, is doing some really excellent work in that regard. So those 10 themes we have articulated off our website and can go into a lot more detail, but there's no shortage of ideas. Poverty is a very complex issue with many underlying reasons why it exists, but there are many solutions that have to be working together, and that's why it just drives me nuts when some reporters and stuff say, well, what's the one thing we should be doing? I say, well, you don't just do one thing. You're more complex than that, and ultimately we see in other jurisdictions real success.
Good, thank you very much. We've had a cancellation, and one of our...
Right. Well, you know, when we went to this economic summit 2-3 weeks ago, almost invariably the eminent economists they brought up, you know, we're talking about a sales tax. And, you know, while the Premier might have, in fact, might have emphatically sort of denied this, right, it's going to be around over the next couple of years. I refuse to believe that it's not going to be implemented sometime, right? And so one of the things that I need to know more about, maybe you know this or not, but you know, this idea where you have a sales tax, but you have a rebate program for a certain level of income, right? And then you know, I've heard the Wild Rose, and they talk about this too, right? You reduce personal income tax and increase, you know, your sales tax, and then the rebates will take care of the problem, right? So, I mean, inherently that seems flawed, but I don't know if you have any reflection or ideas about that.
Well, it's flawed in that many low-income families that are you know at the lowest margins do not actually file their taxes, and it only works if you file your taxes. Pretty much then you'll be eligible for those rebates. So there have been some good programs that have been started, like Make Tax Time Pay, etc., that support low-income people to pay their taxes. But if you're not employed, if you're struggling, the last thing you're going to be doing is necessarily filing your taxes. And so again, those programs really only work if you have an address that a check can be mailed to, and that you file those taxes. So that for the lowest income individuals and families, that's the issue. And then the question becomes, at what threshold do you pay people back on the GST issues? And that's still to be determined, would be set at 30,000 or 40,000 or 80,000. Are you still getting that sales tax rebate? And so that would be a contested issue. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Rachel, do you have another question?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's interesting you said it gets so frustrating when reporters talk to you and say, what's your quickest way to end poverty? But my impression, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my impression out of the report that you guys did, you know, the Alberta Council of Social Workers, I'll point that one, was that you basically framed it in a way so that you could kind of say, if there was one thing we could do quickest and fastest that would make the biggest difference, it would be the family tax credit. Is that correct? And like, is that a correct impression on my part? And what's the cost of that?
The family tax credit is one of a number of solutions. I wouldn't say it is the main one. It's certainly we led with that. The Canadian Child Tax Benefit Program, the CCTB, is a very important federal program. So the key would be to just piggyback on top of that. So you don't create a whole administrative structure. You just say, okay, well, the families here. Other provinces have provincial equivalents to that where they do that. And in Ontario, their 25 and 5 strategy to reduce child poverty by 25% over the next 5 years really use that to great effect. And so, but I wouldn't characterize it at all as the main point. I think investments in public services broadly whether that be making sure that there's greater access to post-secondary education, or that childcare is not privatized and extremely expensive, is on the other side of that equally as important. So poverty often gets reduced to how much money you have in your pocket, and so that's an easy mechanism piece, as opposed to what's the health of our communities that we live in, and you know, are we having to invest in security systems as opposed to buying food for our kids.
Out of curiosity, what was your estimated cost of that? And I compare it, say, for instance, to childcare, which in my mind, I always think in my mind that if we're going to get started on a proper childcare program, we have to sort of mentally get our head around $500 million. And that's roughly the
Yeah.
ballpark, right?
Yeah.
How does that compare to the cost of piggybacking onto the federal program?
I would have to go back to that report to see what the actual numbers were. Again, it's one of these things that you could scale up or do a balanced approach with other issues, but and it would depend as well on, are you putting a lot of money into very low income families and then scaling that back so that it isn't just you get a certain point and then you just all of a sudden no longer eligible for these supports. And the federal CCTB does actually go scale quite high up into middle income families depending on the number of children they have. So if we were to mirror that or even follow what Ontario is doing, we could certainly do that. And that works out to very low income families about $1,300 a month in income supplementation for low income families in Ontario. That's what they're doing. They actually increased it in the middle of the recession last time.
Do you have that number somewhere?
Yep. I have the office.
Thanks very much. I have another question around the social policy framework. And I assume that you or organizations that are part of Public Interest Alberta have been involved in consultations around that. Can you give us an idea what direction it's likely to take when it's announced?
Well, similar to Rachel's question there, it's unfortunately, I think, going to focus on high-level principles at this stage. The actual poverty reduction strategy, Minister Hancock says, will be developed over the next number of months and released in June. So the details of that are not going to come out this Thursday.
Would you expect that if that program is going to be developed and announced sometime in June, there would have to be money allocated in this budget in order to support it?
One would think a 5-year plan to eliminate child poverty is very ambitious to begin with, and if we don't see any real money in this budget, then that's
It's
going to be...
already year 2.
Yeah, it's going to be year 2, and so we have 91,000 children in Alberta living below the low-income measure. It's a huge issue, so if they don't invest in those areas, then that's certainly going to be an indication that promise is not going to be kept. So.
Are there other questions?